Welcome everybody to the Better Block Social Hour. I am Devin Levins. I'm with the City of Tallahassee, Leon County Planning Department, also a member of CNU Florida. Big fan of new urbanism and what's going on there. We have Better Block here with us this afternoon. Krista, good to see you. Kristin, thanks for being here. Sorry, phone's ringing. Good to see both of you. Glad you're both able to be here with us. Krista, you and I met, back in 2016?
A long time ago.
Yeah, you guys came in, helped us out with a project here, and I know you guys are great at transforming spaces, taking underutilized spaces and really making them something people can be proud of. And I think we had a couple accomplishments here in Tallahassee. I know we had a temporary bike lane that was supposed to last a weekend and couldn't get the bike lane all the way back up. It lasted about 6 months, and they're permanent now. So just so you guys know, we did make those permanent. I want to kick it over to you guys and just tell us about Better Block and kind of what your organization is, who you are, and tell us a little bit about what you do and what you're doing in Dallas.
Perfect. Sounds good. Yeah, I enjoyed working with you there in Tallahassee and those bike lanes. That was they ended up, I think the tape got baked onto the ground a little bit, so it worked out. So that's all right. Cool. So let's see. Can I share my screen, please? Sorry, y'all.
Are you able to do it now, Krista, or no?
I am not.
Artie, if you're there in the background, can you make it where Krista can do it? Because I don't believe I can do that either.
I'm working on it.
All right.
Sorry. We'll give a little time for people to join. Oh, there we go. I think I am able. All right. Can you see it?
Yes.
Perfect. Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. I am coming to you from Dallas, Texas. So my name is Krista and I am the Managing Director of the Better Block. And we also have Kristin, who will be talking with you in a moment. She is our Senior Project Manager and she is on site at one of our projects. So she's going to give us a little bit of an actual tour of that space here in a moment. So the Better Block, we're an urban design nonprofit. We're based here out of Dallas. Our work began about 10 years ago when our founding director, Jason, walked out onto this street in Dallas and said, what can we do to make the street better? He was with his neighbors and they all looked at it and they said, we'd like to add some flowers. We'd like to add some cafe seating. And basically, we just want to create a space for people to come together. They quickly found that there were ordinances from the 40s prohibiting many of those things from happening. So to add flowers, it was $1,000. To add cafe seating, it was area times market value times 85% times 12%. And there's actually an ordinance from the 40s that says it's illegal for people to gather on a sidewalk. So as you all know, very well know, this was kind of at the beginning of tactical urbanism. It was definitely at the beginning of that concept here in Dallas. So that is exactly what Jason and his neighbors did. They went out and they created the street that they wanted to see. They created bike lanes with kids paint and duct tape, knowing that they could remove it pretty quickly if they needed to. They rented some lights and they created some seating and basically just made this space where people wanted to be together. They also printed out all those ordinances that they were breaking and they posted them in the windows and they invited city staff to come take a look. They weren't sure what was going to happen, but city staff looked at those things and said, you know what, you're right. We do need to work on making some changes. And before too long, they started to see some progress in that some of the fees were lowered and some of the ordinances were changed. Jason was also really interested in kind of the history of the space. We are not too far from an area of Dallas called the Bishop Arts District, which is really walkable. And he started kind of wondering about the form of the buildings and how they got to be there and how things were designed in this way. And so he started studying these old maps of Dallas. And he saw that there were these really dark lines running through different parts of town. And wherever these dark lines were, the form was built better. And so it didn't take him long to realize that those were maps of the old streetcar lines in the city. There wasn't a streetcar in this part of town, but he started looking at that and thinking about what if we had a streetcar connecting the Oak Cliff neighborhood to downtown? What would happen then? So late one night, he put up this website. He called it the Oak Cliff Transit Authority, and he put up some news and a board and photos and basically created this site that people could go to and reference. The Dallas Morning News ended up writing an article about how this group was trying to bring the streetcar back to town. There's no group, there was not much there except a website, but it did lead to a Tiger Grant and getting the streetcar connecting downtown into Oak Cliff. So Jason started talking about these initiatives that he was doing. He also open sourced a lot of the things that he was doing and created recipes for how to create your own street in your neighborhood. And this allowed the idea of the Better Block to spread around the country and around the world. So this is our home in Dallas. We're in an old car garage, which is what you can see behind me. Kind of show you some of this. So the front area is an office, also sometimes storage as we're working on things. And then the back area is actually our workshop space where we have a CNC router and we do a lot of our building and whatnot back there. We have worked very closely with cities over the years, so much so that it got to the point where some people asked if the idea of tactile urbanism was being dulled because it was becoming city sanctioned. I would argue that that's not possible. The whole point was to get city staff to pay attention to what the neighbors and what the community was asking for. And I think that's been happening more and more as these collaborations have been happening. So this is kind of a look at a typical project that we'll work on. This one is in Akron, Ohio. So generally, when we're looking at a space, there's a street. It's a little bit overbuilt. There is some commercial activity along the edges, though sometimes the buildings are vacant or there may be a little bit more there. And then there's a strong community presence around this area. So our process is 90 to 120 days. We work closely with the community to talk about what's working, what's not working, and what they'd like to see in the area. And then we're working to identify the obstacles that are in the way of making some of these changes happen. Then we're usually on the ground the week of, and we work alongside the neighborhood to make the changes in just a few days. And this is kind of what it ends up looking like. This particular one was very temporary, but what it did is it showed the community that they had the tools, the resources, and the ideas to go out and make these changes. But then it showed city staff, here's how some of these changes do or don't work. And we'll connect the two, the community with city staff, to figure out ways to make things more permanent and to take these lessons learned and make the transformation in this space. We often work in parking lots, and so kind of figuring out how can we transform parking lots into spaces where people want to be. So a lot of times it just takes a lot of volunteers and some supplies, and we can create plazas in these spaces. In Macon, Georgia, we created the world's largest pop-up bike network, which was about 8 miles of bike lanes that were all painted by volunteers. And what ended up happening here is the mayor went to Copenhagen the week after we installed this bike lane, and he came back and he was completely in. And so we've got to make these things permanent. So many of those miles of those bike lanes have actually been made more permanent. This is kind of just a look at an intersection treatment that we'll work on. What was fun about this particular project, this Barberton is right outside of Akron. So they knew of us and they knew our reputation. So before we even started the project, they came in and repaved the road before the project even happened. So we were able to kind of count that as a little bit of a win before we had even started doing anything. 3 years ago, we launched Wikiblock, and this has kind of been a game changer for our organization. It is an open source library that anyone, anywhere can download any of these street furniture designs. You can cut them out using a CNC router, and then you can build them without any glue, screws, or nails. And you can put these elements out on your street and make your street instantly better. So over the past 3 years, our library has become pretty robust. We have lots of seating options and benches and bus attachments and things like that. We can get 2 chairs and a table on one 4x8 sheet of plywood. We also work really closely with local business owners and small business owners, and we try to test out concepts. So we have a bunch of different kiosk designs and different elements that they could use for their work. And then we try to address issues that are happening in our cities. So when bike share came to town, I was a huge fan. I still am. I'm still a scooter fan. But as we know, not everyone is. So I think, one thing that it showed us here in Dallas is that we not only didn't have the street infrastructure that we needed to address some of this, but we also didn't have the parking that we needed for the bikes, and we didn't have places for them to go. So we created a mobility parklet that would house the bikes. You could have bike parking on the end, and even on this little house structure, you could do some bike parking here. But then there's seating for ride share, public transit, any of those items. People have a space to kind of be. So this is online. So if you wanted to, you could download this afternoon and cut it out tomorrow and put it out on your street. We also do some things that are a little out there. A couple years ago, right before 17 days before South by Southwest, the Wisconsin Cheese Board reached out to us and said, we want to create the world's largest cheese board as part of our South by exhibit, but we want it to be housed in a barn. But we're also in a conference room that's got some weird dimensions. So is that something y'all might be able to do? We weren't sure that we couldn't. So this was the design that we put together. This was the night before, hoping that and praying that everything was correct. And this is what it turned out to be. The line was out the door for this exhibit the entire time that they were there. I'm pretty sure it had something to do with the free cheese and wine, but I like to think that the design of the space also drew people into it. And this is actually a Guinness World Record holder. So if you ever want to look that up, you can see that we're officially in the book. So what we were able to do with Wikiblock is it helped us kind of raise the design aesthetic of our work. With finding palettes and some of the elements that are in your spaces, it takes a little bit level of design expertise and abilities. I have a degree in journalism. I am not able to make anything look beautiful, but with Wikiblock, we're able to have these elements that are there, but you can still add your own twist to them, and you can bring your community's own character into them. And they're also community built, so you're building alongside your neighbors. And Wikiblock was able to kind of take us to that level. It also helps us, we very often are asked to look at massive lots that need a lot of infilling, and to do that infilling to make it feel like a place where people should be and can be, it takes a lot of resources. But with Wikiblock, we're able to kind of look at these spaces and better define the edges and bring some warmth into the area. And I mentioned warmth specifically for this project because this was in Duluth, Minnesota in November. And the challenge was, how do we get people to come hang out even though it's freezing outside? And this is kind of what it turned into. With Wikiblock, we were able to design this structure here, which was kind of a take on an old train station. So on the other side, there's seating as people wait for public transit or ride share. But then we've got some spaces in here where vendors could set up, and it was a market. And then we also had this gateway entry point as well. And then we also have some more permanent work that we do. So this particular project came out of that Akron project. We realized that there was a large Bhutanese refugee population in the neighborhood right behind that street. And there were a lot of houses there that were in a lot of disrepair and were kind of, needing some love. So we were able to purchase one of the houses, and we turned it into a cultural center on the bottom floor for the community that was there. But then on the second floor, we had 3 rooms that we rented out on Airbnb to kind of help us offset some of the costs. And then again, there was a massive lot behind the house that was kind of a cut through to a local grocery store. So we took that parking lot and we turned it into a park for the community. Now, our goal for this was to not be involved for the long haul. This isn't our neighborhood, this isn't our home, so we didn't think that that was something we needed to do. But what we wanted to do was set it up and get it going and hand off the keys. So from the very beginning, we hired locally, and the people that we hired initially became the managers. And on December 23rd, we officially handed the keys over to them to continue running and making this concept what it is today. In Burtonsville, this was actually Kristin's project that she did last year, a massive shopping center. And the goal was, you know, turn it into a space for the community. The community for years had been asking for a place to have a lot more recreation and be able to come together. And so this was a massive undertaking, and kind of the goal here was to show the property owners like this space could be something, and the community definitely wants it to be something, so let's work on it together. In Toronto last year, we created Canada's first ever Vision Zero pop-up. And that was an interesting process because in a lot of our work, and I'm sure those of you who have done this before too know this, cities are used to doing block permits where you just shut off the traffic. But of course, what we're trying to do is showcase what realistically could happen and what we could kind of strive for to make things a little bit more permanent. So they had to figure out what that permitting structure looked like to allow something like this to happen. Now, if y'all will see in this design, what we did is we extended this sidewalk and then did the bike lane and did buffers with planters. Originally, what we wanted to do was the bike lane here with the parking as a buffer. And that was a huge thing. When people got to test this out, they loved the bike lanes. They loved the fact that it was buffered, but they wanted the parking. So that was a little bit of a compromise. And the mayor actually just installed, I forget, it's in kilometers, so I don't remember what it translates to, but it's several miles of a buffered bike lane that is in some places buffered by planters, some places buffered by parking, and it's been received very well throughout this COVID time. I'm gonna skip this one really quick, and this one as well. And so that brings us to Vickery Meadow. So last year we were asked to look at a project here in Dallas, and it's called, the neighborhood is called Vickery Meadow. It's an incredible neighborhood. You can see here, this is a 5-point intersection area, but in the top left corner that you can't see, there's a school right here. It's Sam Tasby Middle School. There are 180 languages spoken at that school right there. And then most of the kids live over in this corner over here in apartment buildings, and they're walking to and from school from their apartments. And unfortunately, this neighborhood is also one of the highest crime neighborhoods in the city. And so we were asked to take a look at it and think through ways that we can make it safer for those kids as they're walking to and from school. And so what we did is kind of looked at this intersection, and first off, we thought, okay, there are a couple right-hand turns that seem a little unnecessary, especially as the kids are walking home and walking through these spaces. There's not really a crossing guard here or here to protect them. They're up here. So that was one section we want to look at. And then we thought, well, there's this space here. There's this fruit stand right here. That's one of the best things in the neighborhood. She's awesome. So how can we kind of help support her and create a space that perhaps the kids would want to go? So we worked with the community to identify some things that they would like to see, and this is what it ended up turning into. So we worked to turn off these right-hand turns, and we've talked to the crossing guards quite often about this, and they have not seen any issues from the vehicles as they're going through this area. This 5-point intersection is still awful and still needs a lot of work, but we were able to at least kind of make those spaces a little bit better. And then in the plaza itself, we created some active and passive elements that would allow for it to be activated whenever there's programming and there's things going on, but then some passive elements to where you could just hang out there if there was nothing going on. So we're going to attempt this. We're going to try to go to Kristin, who's live at the plaza. It is raining and there are a lot of cars coming by. So we're going to see if we can check in with her and kind of see what the plaza, what that looks like now.
Hi guys, I'm not sure if you can see me, but I'll flip my screen here in a second. See, there it is. Reporting live, obviously from Vickery and in the middle of a rainstorm. I wanted to walk you guys around. Krista, can you guys see what I'm looking at?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Wanted to show you guys around the plaza. This is kind of an overview, same angle as you guys probably saw from the aerial photograph, but you can see we did a lot of work with hexagonal benches, planters to add some green to the space. We've got a Morris column here for public events and the community to share with, as well as a little free library on each side. to sort of help us tap into and distribute the free books we were able to partner with Half Price Books on. Here you can see our stage. It unfortunately has not been activated as much as we would have liked because of COVID, but it has held quite a few dance parties and DJs and dance troupes and performances from some kids. Coming around this way, you can see the container. I'll take you there in a minute.
Krista, can I stop you real quick? Krista, will you stop sharing your screen so she can go full screen?
Yes. Okay,
awesome.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Here, I'll run back through that one more time. We've got the stage and performance parklet here. We've got some landscaping, string lights hung up, little free library with a Morris column, the containers. You can see kind of the mix of landscaping, greenery, information for the public. We extended that out into those right-hand turns like Krista was talking about. There is one, and across the street is another. Those really make a difference for the walkability of the space. And here you can see the container that we modified. It's our TBK Bank Plaza container with our partner. And you can see it's a little bit of a storage heap right now, but we've got a little free library that we are filling here. And we've got the library here. It served as a pop-up, food distribution center, census count, kind of headquarters. It served as a site for the Lunar New Year this year. There's been quite a few interesting things pop up here. So it serves as both like a dining room and a counter for distribution of different items. And it's just a really great community hub, taking this space that was really great. And this is the kind of partner in the area, Monarca Fruiteria. She's a great partner who helps us take care of the space and keeps some eyes on it. So just another shot. It's a little rainy today, but you can get a feel for the inside when it's activated. We turn on the string lights. This space is pretty modular with music and electricity and these counters that fold out. So there's a lot of great stuff we can do here.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Kristin.
Sure.
Kristin, if you wouldn't mind going outside one more time and looking across the street. The other way, sorry, to the buildings that we painted. So one thing that we worked on with this space is we repainted all the buildings across the street as well as the awnings. And then probably the biggest change over there was there were bars on all of the windows along that side. So we worked with the business owners to take down all the bars off the windows. It was a big moment and a scary moment for everyone, just because there was a lot of fear in doing that. You'll see there's some posters that have gone back up and some things have been covering some of the windows, but we did that in November and there have not been any break-ins as a result of that over there. Let's see, I'm looking. The stage was a big thing that the community asked for. They wanted to be able to have dance parties and host different things there. Like Kristin said, COVID really put a damper on everything that we wanted to do in this space. We did have food distribution, like she mentioned out of there. There was also a photo shoot, so that the container's been a studio. We're working on maybe doing something small in October and kind of building up from there. And like I said, Monarca has been such an amazing partner and we've really enjoyed getting to work with them. So in March, what we saw was that crime was down 10% in this area, but it was up 16% in the city. So there was a 26% swing. Since this plaza has been installed, there has not been any crime in the plaza itself. But a big thing to us is that it does feel welcoming to all. So the first night that it was installed, we came back the next day and we asked the security, who just kind of hangs out in the area, kind of what they had seen, what they noticed. And they said, we didn't have any issues in the plaza. In fact, one of our well-known drug dealers actually came out and he brought his daughter and they just hung out. So we felt like that was a good sign that people would feel comfortable hanging out in this space. And that they could use it for, whatever purpose and just kind of as a place for the community to be. Do you all have, before I go back into my presentation, I don't want to make Kristin stay out there in the rain for too terribly long. Do you all have any questions for her while she's out there? Anything you'd like to see?
And if anyone has questions, you guys can put them into the question and answer box, or you could raise your hand and we could bring you in as a panelist and you could ask that question live. I'm not getting anything right now, Krista.
Okay. All right, Kristin, you're good. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
All right, I will go back into my screen share then. Perfect. So that is Vickery. So the question now, we actually had a lease, a $10 lease for a year on this space. And so that ends in December. So literally just sent an email to the property owner to ask what they would like to do and what might happen. One really cool thing that's happening is a library is going in across the street. That's going to have a plaza. So if this plaza does not remain, I think a lot of the elements and some of the things that we were able to do can translate and go across the street and still be a space that the community can continue to use.
Krista, we did have one question come in.
Yeah.
Laurel was asking, were there any incentives for the business owners to remove the bars besides being part of the project, like economic incentives?
No, we repainted their window, all their buildings and all of their awnings for them. And we also added some murals in different spaces with the community. We also worked with the property owner to add some other kind of safety features in the area as well. So we were able to add those things. Like this awning here was this, it was all rusted out and this kind of blue at that point. So we repainted all those elements for them. Cool. All right, and that's kind of just on the ground. You saw some of that. So another thing that we do is we've got our concept of the better block in a box, which is basically all the placemaking elements you need inside a shipping container. So we put a lot of our wiki block elements in there. They flat pack and store away. We can ship the container and then it'll get to your spot, and then you can set up your space in about 2 hours with volunteers. The container itself then is empty, so you can use it as a pop-up restaurant, or we've had a newsroom pop up in there, or like we were saying, kind of a photo shoot, distribution, whatever you want that container to be, it can become that. So we're working with some different groups and organizations on creating some custom custom containers right now. So we've got probably 3 or 4 shipping containers in our yard at the moment. And then of course, as we all know, COVID-19 changed a lot of things for a lot of people. The very first thing we did is we started with face shields. We saw that a lot of people were 3D printing face shields, but our 3D printer, it's not great. So it took us about 3 hours to make one. We realized pretty quickly we could put it on the CNC router and we could get 88 face shields in 1 hour. So that's what we transitioned to. We open sourced our design, and pretty quickly people were picking it up from all over the world and tweaking it and creating face shields that way. We ended up producing, I think, close to 11,000 face shields in the first few weeks here in Dallas. We're also working on hand sanitizer stations and kind of doing some playful takes on what those could look like. We transformed restaurants into bodegas when they were all shut down, and kind of as a way to sell some of the produce, but also kind of keep going. Of course, parklets, everybody knows parklets now, which is really great. So working with the city on some of those concepts and showing folks what that looks like and building some of those into spaces, market stalls as well. Just kind of trying to find ways to give businesses a chance to spread out, but still keep going. We also did some slow streets programs. We did one in Kansas City as well as Dallas. And the big thing we learned, from that, which I'm sure many of you have seen, instead of telling a street it's going to be a slow street, we worked to create programs where neighborhoods could apply to be a slow street. And that seemed to work pretty well in most cases. And people really enjoyed their being able to be a slow street. We got some good feedback on a lot of that. I did get one angry call who said it wasn't fair. He was one street over and he was concerned that traffic was going to increase on his street. Unfortunately, we just didn't have any data on that. And he didn't gather any data. So I don't know if that actually happened or not, but it is possible. So that's one thing we learned as far as next steps. We would definitely want to gather some of that. And then really quickly, kind of looking at some of the impact of some of the stuff that we've worked on. You know, community partnerships form generally throughout the process of a Better Block. We have seen in about 65% of the projects that we've done, policy changes have been impacted. And this is looking back on projects that have been in the last 4 years, 3 to 4 years. And then we've also seen like new businesses pop up in the area, not always, but that is something that we try to strive to make happen. Obviously, there's an increase in community engagement generally in the work that we're doing. In 43%, sorry, that graph's wrong, but in 43%, we see street changes coming after a project. And then also programming is a big part of it. People get really creative in programming and kind of get to test out some concepts, so those kind of continue on in the projects as well. Usually when I talk about our work, the first question I get is, well, what if someone comes in and destroys what you've built? Or more realistically, the question I get is, what about the homeless? So I always tell people we build for love, not for fear. And we build for the community that's there and not for the what ifs that we come up with. I would say 9 times out of 10, that works out. And it kind of shows people you can trust the neighborhood and you can trust the community. Sometimes we build for Instagram. We think that, you know, if you make beautiful spaces that people want to come and they want to show off, then that kind of builds up that neighborhood pride just a little bit. And so we do like to kind of be playful and push ourselves on design and create some fun elements as well. And so that is kind of what we do here at the Better Block.
Krista, thanks. That's been awesome. You guys, since we worked together around 2016, you've really expanded your toolbox, what you guys are doing, and it looks like you've pushed it even further during COVID to just really get out there and show what people can do if they really put their minds to it and want to approach it very quickly. And I think that's been the most awesome thing I've seen from you guys since day one is Jason is pushing that, and he's hired a team now around him that's just really getting in there and doing it. The bodegas were a big hit, it looks like, with this group. We're going to open it up in just a second and have all the panelists come on. So there's only about 12 folks on right now. But I wanted to put one question out there that came in. It was, how did you guys start working with the small businesses to do the bodegas and then the other COVID response modifications? Did you reach out directly to businesses, or did you have to go through any red tape or permitting for that?
There's always red tape and permitting. No, so we have a cheat in that Jason, our founding director, he owns a restaurant, he owns a jazz hall, and he owns an outdoor store. So what's handy about that is we often test out a lot of our stuff in real time at his concepts, and we get to see how they work or they don't work. So that when we're talking to other small businesses in other cities and with other projects, we can talk about our real-time experience with that versus, more hypothetical. So those first bodegas, I mean, that was the first thing he did is we actually had those shelves here from a project that got canceled because of COVID. So he just took them all and just put them out in front of his store and immediately turned it into the bodega. There were some lessons learned. The bodega was definitely a difficult concept, keeping things cold, making sure it's all fresh. It was more of a challenge than any of us originally thought. So that was a really good learning opportunity for us. The same thing with the parklet. So the parklet you saw there might not be entirely permitted. So the city of Dallas was looking at doing a temporary parklet program. And our councilman reached out and asked us to put something up and kind of show people what we're talking about when we say parklet. So we did that one over a weekend. That one, it turns out, was actually maybe a little more intense than they were anticipating. We didn't know it at the time. So, but it's still there, and it was huge to his business. just being able to allow people to spread out and to give that extra space to his business really did help it out. And we can, look at his numbers and show kind of what impact that had.
Yeah, I think that's great that you talk about kind of, going bigger than what they thought you would do. That kind of ties right into what Chuck Marone was just talking about. He said, if you're going to be a leader, you just kind of got to go for it and break some of the rules and, see kind of where you land. It's been opened up now that everyone that's on could turn their cameras on and unmute themselves and ask a question if they wanted to. So feel free to do that. And Krista, one thing I noticed is you guys finally have a swing. I know that was something like we're in Tallahassee. Jason kept saying he wanted to do swings like we had in Tallahassee, and now I see you guys have one.
We do. So that one, those swings were loved very hard. We learned, night one, watching people on swings, it was, I'm surprised I didn't have a heart attack that night. So we made some modifications. We learned a lot. And we're working on a more permanent design now to put in that place, because again, it was so well loved and so well used that we realized we need to kind of do something a little more permanent in that space. But yeah, you're the original inspiration for swings. So
we love it. Anyone out there have a question? You want to unmute yourself, ask a question of Krista, the Better Block team? They're shy, Krista. All right,
I'll
Laura.
ask a question.
Go ahead.
Not to hammer home the bodega issue, but did other businesses follow suit? Were they inspired by what happened? Did they reach out to you guys for help in setting it up, or did they maybe come up with something on their own?
Yeah, we shared the shelves with some folks and kind of talked them through our process. There was a group in Austin who, they were going to get the shelves from us, and then they're like, we found someone else who could do them as well. So that was cool. And I have noticed Wikiblock, our designs are free to download. And, but I get a notification whenever someone does it. It has really picked up over the past 6 weeks. I would even say this week, I have noticed so much more Wikiblock downloads. So I know people are definitely out there looking for ways to use some of these things and to rethink the streets and some of the spaces in the parking lots. So definitely have noticed more and more of that happening.
Artie, you have any questions?
No questions at the moment, but I'll just make sure everyone knows that I've made everyone a panelist, so you can turn on your video if you'd like and unmute yourselves and kind of engage in a conversation that way if you want to.
Amanda, you unmuted. You want to say something?
I did unmute. Yeah, I had to unmute twice. I was super interested in, it was just like a little tiny anecdote that you shared of a person who maybe had traditionally been in the space where you were showing live. I had to come in late, so I'm very sorry I didn't catch the beginning. But talking about a drug dealer out there with his daughter, and I'm so curious to know if there are other success stories in kind of reclaiming space and redefining that so that user groups see that they can be used differently. I don't know how easily it is to share that kind of story, but I thought that was so interesting that this little girl now gets to go out and spend time with her dad in a space when before perhaps he was engaging in different activities without her. Thank goodness.
Yeah. So that was a main focus on that particular project was kind of the high crime and is there a way you can address it? And so that one it's been really interesting to see that and to look at that. And, we've tried some different approaches. Like there's a street behind that project that's not very good and lots of things keep happening there. And so our original goal, the original thing we wanted to do had we had the funding we wanted was to go in and make it really playful and make it something where the kids would feel really comfortable and just, really bright pink and purple and really whimsical. So we're kind of still exploring some of those things and what that looks like. We don't want anyone to feel uncomfortable in a space. The goal is that everyone feels like they're welcome and that they can be there. You know, we definitely, people are always concerned about the homeless. I gave a similar presentation to a group in Russia, and they called it the drunks, I believe is what they were saying. And that was kind of their term for it. And that was the first question I got, which I just thought was really interesting. And so, but we don't build to keep people away. You know, like we're not going to put in defensive architecture. We're not going to create spaces where someone would not feel like they aren't welcome to be there. And that space, you know, we have seen some homeless people do sleep in the chairs there. I've had conversations with them. There's one lady who she wants to water the plants and she kind of picks up the trash. So like she's one of our stakeholders and she takes care of the space. So again, I know that's not always the situation or always the case, but we've always had pretty good luck kind of addressing spaces in that way.
Krista, you mentioned Russia. What's the furthest reach you've had successfully implementing a project like this?
Oh man, let's see. I think Jason consulted on one in Tehran. Australia seems to do a few projects, and so we've helped them with some stuff. I'm always fascinated when anyone, you know, in Copenhagen or Paris, you know, talks about doing the projects because we're taking their ideas. You know, they do have the good spaces, and so a lot of the concepts come from them. Yeah, I went to Paris last year and someone wanted to connect me with people because she said they could really learn so much from you. And I was just like, really? What could they learn? But she was talking about green spaces. She said, you know, a lot of their green spaces are really fenced off. And I noticed that, you know, walking around. So I thought that was really fascinating. I think we can all learn from each other.
And do you have a question? I saw you.
Yeah, I was curious and I'm a little, I don't want to derail, you know, the specific design, but I'm curious about what it's like working in the nonprofit sector in urban design and maybe some trials and tribulations and some benefits of working in that space.
Oh man, that is, I swear one day when I leave the nonprofit sector, I will be writing an op-ed. There are many thoughts. No, you know, it's fascinating. From an urban design in nonprofit space, it really depends on the city that you're in. So in Dallas, this is just not seen as a priority. A lot of times we're told we're beautifying spaces, which yes, and we are, but we're also addressing some of the systemic issues that our cities are facing. And what drew me to this is an urban planner, you all may be familiar with him, Patrick Kennedy. He started talking about tearing down a highway between downtown and a neighboring community. And I was working at the City Magazine at the time. And grew up on a farm, had never really thought about city design or urban planning, any of that. And that was the first time where I realized we used elevated highways to segregate our cities. I had never thought about that. I had never looked at that or seen it. And that just kind of blew me away. So, but that's not talked about much in Dallas. It's better now. Conversations have started, but still, philanthropists don't know what to do with us. They don't know what bucket to put us in. We don't fit in many of the buckets, and I'm working to change it, but it's taken some time. And there's not a lot of, you know, individuals who this is their passion, you know, kids and puppies and things like that. It's a little more, you can easily align with that and you know what that looks like. It's kind of like you're going to add a bike lane. I don't understand, you know? So that is a bit of a challenge. There are some national nonprofit or national foundations who this is a focus of theirs, and they do incredible work. And so that's really exciting to see that and to kind of see how that plays out. I'll tell you, the best we've ever done with fundraising in Dallas was when we did the face shields. That was something where people were like, oh, of course. Yeah, this makes sense, you know, and immediately, like, they gave us that, people were giving us donations for that. And it was really easy, if that's the word. But, you know, ultimately that's not what we do. We use those machines to make streets better and to, you know, help out small businesses. And that didn't translate as much. Now with COVID, a lot of our work is a little more mainstream. Like people do know what a parklet is now. I don't have to go through and explain it as much as before. And, you know, I don't know if any of y'all cities are facing this, but we have a lot of drag racing and street racing happening around Dallas. So we've been kind of talking about how road diets can help deter that. And that has been actually getting some traction and it's working. So that's been fascinating. So, you know, I think just with our work in nonprofits, it's a lot of education and it takes a lot of time. And we don't always have that much time to wait. So it's definitely a challenge. I don't know if that answered your question.
Good. Yeah, I know. It kind of gave me an overview, and it's it's interesting to hear because I guess I didn't really know what to expect for your answer, why I had the question,
Yeah.
but it's certainly not. It gives a different perspective completely, and it's interesting that it ties really well into the other conversations today. And, you know, adaptability, bringing what you have to the table in changing times, but also kind of thinking about some of these silos and where when you're straightforward and you know what you're doing, sometimes it's easier, like face shields, but when you're broad and, you know, addressing problems where they are and they're very different, it can be challenging, but also really rewarding too. And so bringing that together is really, it's really neat. So great to hear about what you're doing. It's fascinating.
Thank you. Thanks.
Can you
So one
talk
of the-
about the CNC router a little bit and just how that enabled you to like either scale up your business or how that changed things?
Yeah, that was huge for us. Being able to fabricate and design and test out was kind of game changing. So it took us from, and it ultimately, the reason we started it was to make our lives easier. It was really hard to always go out and find pallets that were going to work and be able to transform them into something great. They all needed to kind of be the same, and we couldn't find that. So it really helped us with that. And again, it also helped us kind of raise the design aesthetic. And we have found that so much of being able to sell people, if you will, on making these things more permanent is the marketing. And it is that before after photo, and it is those beautiful pieces that can be in the space. So that's been huge. You know, another part of our work is that it's temporary. And so when it's a 2-day demonstration, it's not as cheap as you would like it to be. So it's really hard to think like this is all going to go away in just 2 days. So with our WikiBlock elements and with the furniture that we do now, they last longer. You know, we have some pieces that have lasted for about 2 years that are still in our yard. Some of it, you know, might give out after 6 or 8 months, but that still gives you just a little more time to measure the impact and kind of see how people use the elements. And it helps, you know, inform your decision as to whether or not you want to make an even larger investment and make the things a little more permanent. And it's also just been a lot of fun to kind of play with some concepts and dream up some things and say like, hey, let's go test this out and see if we can actually do this. And so we've enjoyed that.
That is fun. Thank you. So a lot of people in the office know how to use the machine and engage.
No, that's, you know, that's actually my COVID project is I'm learning all the elements that I've let everyone else kind of run. So I've mastered the drone now. And next is the laser cutter and then the CNC router. So we actually have, I'd say like 1.5 people who can run the CNC router. But with the CNC, a big part of it is we test it out here. We put the designs together here, but when we do projects in other cities, we hire locally. So we try to find local fabricators who can cut things out and who can kind of build some of the elements. So we've actually, and that helped with the face shields because we've created quite a network of fabricators around the country who we've worked with in the past. So when we switched to the face shields, we put it out to them. We're like, hey guys, if you want to do something, because everyone was looking to do something, we sent them that and said, go for it. And people were paying for the face shields as well. And so that ended up, we were able, I mean, I know several people who came out of furlough so that they could manufacture the face shields, and then those went to the healthcare workers. So it ended up being this really interesting, kind of fascinating thing. And we learned a lot about healthcare distribution, which who knew?
Wow. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Artie, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to say one of the themes that I've kind of observed across all three presentations today was this idea that, you know, as urbanists, as professionals, we kind of tend to want to like lead everything and do everything and tell everyone how things should be. But as urbanists, new urbanists, we should probably start kind of stepping aside a little bit and letting the decisions be driven locally while we provide, you know, the resource, the technical knowledge, all that to support what they want to do. You know, so I know that seems very in line with what I know of Better Block and my experience working with you guys and Devin. What are some of the most effective ways you've seen Better Block really be a resource to empower people at the local level?
Yeah, so great question. We often say we listen first, design second, listen again, and then tweak. So our process is a lot of listening. And I think part of that is because none of us are experts here at the Better Block. I have a journalism background. Jason has IT. Our CNC operator is furniture, and our project manager is an accountant by trade. So we've got kind of this weird mix of people. And I think we all feel like imposters in a lot of ways. So because of that, we tend to listen quite a bit. You know, it's interesting when you listen and when you're in the role that we're in. No, it wasn't Tallahassee. It was around the same time that we did that project, though. It was one of my first projects. We were in a neighborhood, and it was definitely, there was a little bit of gentrification happening, and there was the community that was there, and the two sides were our block captains. And there was one moment while we were setting up and we were trying to figure out where the beer garden should go in relation to the playground, that I realized our role was actually just therapists. Like, we were just there to listen to the two sides and to kind of talk them through the changes that were happening in the community, why those changes maybe weren't all accepted, and kind of bring them to this point. And then ultimately, you know, what we did is test out the one idea one night and the other idea the next night, and let them decide which one felt better. So I think it's just being willing to be open and to listening, and then understanding that we're not going to be perfect. Like, none of our projects will not be 100% perfect. There will be things that we need to learn, and we'll learn them on site. That's usually why we do 2 days. I think Devin, in ours, there was one night where we did one thing a certain way, and then the next day we changed. And I think it ended up being the right change, but it's just kind of living it and being there and being willing to change things up if they're necessary.
Yeah, you scared me to death that day. We had a band set up in this little area in the back, and Krista's like, nobody's going back there. They were there at night because it was a cool nighttime venue, but it wasn't a daytime venue. And I was like, if you think we should do it, do it. I'm just, let's go with it. And it worked great. It was awesome.
Yeah.
Krista, a question for you that I think would help folks here is, you know, you guys talk about a 2-day, like we do them in 2 days. There's months of planning that goes into these before that 2 days, right? So you're transforming the space in 2 days, but getting everything set up to get there, it takes a little bit of time. Can you talk about that process?
Yeah, so it's usually 90 to 120 days. This may be a change from our time, Devin. We have a guide now that really breaks it down and takes you through the process. And then we assign you a project manager from our team who helps you through the whole process. We have block captains who are the local leads that are kind of taking things on. So usually it's one from the city and one from the community. And then we have different volunteer positions underneath that for the different categories that are needed. So yeah, it's a process to do the surveys, to put those surveys into a concept plan, and then to get all the materials together and get everything ready, get all the permitting in place and all that good stuff. And then we put it out on the ground. Usually within 3 or 4 days, we do the transformation. And then we'll have like a 2-day event. And then most of the time we take it down after that. Some of the projects have been longer lately.
I think back whenever you and I were working together, it was one of your first projects that you were kind of the project manager for. And prior to that, so you kind of touched on this a little bit in your presentation. You're talking about pallets and finding pallets that look exactly the same. You know, back when we were doing it pre-2016 and then probably midway 2016, 2017, you see this shift where everybody was looking for recyclables. We were looking for tires and PVC pipe and just things we could get our hands on that we could kind of just put together and piece together to make something interesting. And we brought in components because you guys had just got the CNC router to kind of do that, but there wasn't a real formula yet for how it worked, but we were getting there. Is the like the tire climbing and the hay bales, are those still things that you guys implement, or are you really moving forward with this more modern, you know, that could be a little more semi-permanent than super temporary?
I think it's a little more semi-permanent. Like, I think that's kind of where we're heading. And that's partly because people are kind of saying, well, if we're going to spend this much money, I want to see some of the things last a little bit longer. We still do some of those other elements when it's appropriate or when it makes sense to have them in the space. But I'm thinking through some of our last projects, and I'd say, you know, like we did a playground in West Allis, Wisconsin last year, and it was a very natural kind of playground approach, but it was a permanent take on that. So yeah, we've kind of moved a little bit. We can still do the quick and fast and, you know, kind of get it out there, but we definitely want to make sure it's something that makes an impact regardless of how long it's there.
Do you think from that perspective, working with communities, if they're not working with a group like Better Block, they don't have access to CNC routers, is there still a need for that type of quick intervention or quick demonstration and ways for people to be able to do that at the community level that even maybe with or without government or maybe a local nonprofit helping with?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely when it comes to street changes and street infrastructure, you can make a big impact with just a little bit of paint. So I still think that is definitely something that can be done. You know, and some of the other elements can be done as well. Sorry, it's late on a Monday and you had said something and now my brain is blanking on my other point I was going to make. Sorry, y'all. I'm going to chalk that one up to COVID brain. But yeah, I think there's still a place for that as well, for sure. And there are a lot of different ways that people can go about it. We've got a lot of resources on our website. We do a lot of guides and different things like that to kind of help people through the process as well.
Well, it is 6:42. If there's anyone that wants to ask a last question of Krista, but we'll let her go if there's no other questions. Anyone have a question for her?
Can I ask a question?
Hey, Tatiana, yeah, go ahead.
Hi. I don't know if you covered this earlier. Like you said, COVID brain, we've probably gone through a lot of stuff. But what is the financial sort of investment from the community itself? Or is it like just on a volunteer sort of sweat equity basis that, you know, they become involved with the project? I was just curious about the cost side of things. And I know that it will probably vary project to project, but just generally speaking.
Yeah, so generally when we're coming in, we have secured funding. So that may be from a foundation, it may be from a grant, it may be from the city. The general cost range, I would say probably like 60 to that Vickery Meadow project, which has been up for a year, was closer to 150. So it's definitely got a range to it. We generally do that before we talk to the community and let them know that it's happening. So at that point, it's really just their time, which is super valuable. We do move, I mean, 90 to 120 days is pretty quick. And we do it that fast because we don't want people to overthink or overmeet. But it does mean that the volunteers are putting in quite a bit of time.
That was interesting.
Yeah, they put in quite a bit of time just to get to that point. So we definitely take a lot of their time for sure, but generally we're not asking them for a lot of funding. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we'll ask them, you know, if you've got some connections and you can get some materials or some resources a little cheaper, or if you can get those things donated, you know, we'll try to do that and make the dollar stretch as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Krista, we really appreciate you and the Better Block team for taking this on, doing this afternoon with us. anything you want to leave us with, or how, if folks want more information on Better Block, any place they can visit to get that information?
Yep, you can obviously go to our website, betterblock.org. You can also send me an email. It's just Krista@betterblock.org. It's Krista. We are always up for challenges. So if you have something that's fun and out there, we are happy to take it on. But yeah, thank you so much for spending your evening with me. It was great talking with all of you. And Devin, as always, good to catch up with you and reminisce.
Absolutely. We'll have to do it again soon.
Love it.
Artie, do you want to give a pitch for tomorrow for anything?
Sure. I think just kind of building on what we did today, tomorrow is going to be pretty exciting as well. Let me see. I think I can do this. All right. So I just shared the schedule for tomorrow. Resilience and adaptability will be the theme for tomorrow. Honestly, it'll start off with Andres Dewani, who is really going to kind of talk about urbanism, post-pandemic, kind of building off of a lot of things that we're dealing with and thinking about today. And then we move to another part of the state. We go from Miami area up to Panama City, Florida, in the Panhandle, to listen to Eric Pate kind of talk about some of the things that they've done in Panama City following Hurricane Michael. And I know for those of you who were at the CNU Florida Summit last year, there was a presentation on it. This is kind of the next step. The presentation last year was kind of the plans, and now we start seeing them move into implementation. So I think it'll be interesting as we move into that. And then the social hour tomorrow will be the Nolan Medal Award. That's an award that we try to give out every year to a new urbanist who is making great strides in the field and kind of recognized among peers. It'll start off with a presentation from Bruce Stevenson from Rollins College on who John Noland was and why we have an award named after him. Then the recipient will receive the award that'll be announced. And then we'll kind of move into just more of a social time, a couple of updates from people around the state, and just casual conversation.
Thanks, Artie. I appreciate that update for tomorrow. And if anyone wasn't on today to hear Andres Dewani's comments that he made, you won't want to miss Andres tomorrow, because he definitely hits the nail on the head and doesn't care what he says. So I think it's always good to hear his perspective. So with that, thanks for everyone being here, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.